Good morning, and welcome to our Services Week breakfast event on service patterns. So there's been a lot of buzz recently about service patterns. If you're still not sure what they are repeatable blueprints that help us to scale our services quicker, building on the lessons that have been learned from others. So today we have brought together a panel of people from different industries and government departments. They're all at different stages with their journeys with service patterns. Today's going to run, we're going to have introductions from our panel where they're going to introduce themselves and their department and the work that they've been doing. We're going to have a bit of a discussion. We're going to dig into why patterns are important, where we are with implementing them, and what needs to be done next. And then we'll open up for some questions to the audience. So my name's Jen. I am a Senior Interaction Designer at Ministry of Justice.
I'm Jaskiran Kang, Head of Service and Organisation Design at TPXimpact, and both myself and Jen are going to be facilitating the discussion today. So just a bit about us at TPX. So we are with our clients doing some service mapping exercises where we've been spotting patterns, and what we're finding is there's huge overlaps between other services across different departments. So if you just go on to the next slide. And what we're doing as we're mapping services and finding patterns is that we're using that knowledge to shape backlogs and roadmaps. And what we think and we assume and what we're advocating for is that the use of patterns and components can actually scale efficiency. And we actually think design's a critical part of shaping business cases. And we're seeing lots of data and tech initiatives, and we think design should be quite a fundamental part in the way that we use that evidence to shape our business cases. So if you could just go to the next slide. Just yesterday, I was doing this, but we're running service pattern spotting workshops and masterclasses with our clients. And what we're doing in there is that we're sharing tools and methods to help build capability so that those who are new to service spotting can have that awareness, they can start implementing some of that knowledge into the work that we're doing. And actually, a lot of the time, we already know what patterns are. It's just that we need to surface them and actually acknowledge them because actually patterns are just the way that we think. And so actually we just need to put a bit more attention into them when we're mapping and thinking about our services. But ultimately what we're really trying to do, and I think this is going to be a really nice, interesting conversation, but what we're trying to do is to define good standards to enable teams to be able to reuse those components. A lot of the time we talk about patterns, but actually if we can, as a community, get better at recording and documenting them, we might be in a position where we can actually start supporting better consistency across not just the departments that we work in, but across organisations, and that's very much needed if we really truly want to build end-to-end services that actually meet user outcomes. So that's us as TPX, and I'm now going to pass on to Nikola. Nikola, actually all our panel members, if you don't mind, when you do introduce yourself, if you could introduce yourself describing who you are, what is the problem you're trying to solve with service patterns, and what have you done so far? And then lastly, what work have you been doing with service patterns when you're introducing yourself? Thank you.
That's a lot of questions. Can you click for me? I'm Nikola Goger. I'm the head of design of Ministry of Justice. And we're in a bit of a hot phase at the moment with service patterns. So we started looking a lot more at taxonomies because we realized even between us, everyone means something slightly different when we say service patterns. So that is quite important, and our brains are exploding a bit around all of that. But I think we're getting to something really exciting, and that is actually quite cutting edge and so on. So I think my definition around or what I want to get out of service patterns is this something that's shareable, something that's useful, something that can be hosted in some kind of a central place, and that can be productified. So we really want to get to a big box of Lego where everyone can use. This is where I plug our blog, so you can read up what we're up to. I think we're up to like half a dozen blog posts by now, so quite a lot. Go to the next one. So this is some of the thinking, so what the vision could be, so around this box of Lego. So on the far side, the green stuff. So this could be the Lego box around citizens, so where citizens want to communicate with us in some way, so apply for something, give us information. The blue bit would be our internal like case management systems, so where we have information about someone and make a decision or do something with it, basically. And the pink parts are operational things like our like the data platforms, or we have something like contract management and so on. So, and then the idea is that our teams can take bits from the different boxes and build services. Ideally, I don't know, 60% or something would already be there that they can just take, and then really focus on the 40% that is unique to what we're doing in that specific service. So that's the dream where we are at.
Hello, I'm Martin for Downs. I'm a lead service designer also at the Ministry of Justice. I think we're trying to tackle a few problems, but the one that always comes first to mind is just stopping building the same things again and again and again. We're a really big organisation, and you can sometimes have two teams in the same organisation both tackling the same problem, not even knowing that you're both doing it. So there's something about both how we plan for the things we're going to build, and then also how we then go about building them. I think we'll hopefully get to elaborate on that a bit later on. In terms of my journey with service patterns, it started in the private sector, and we created something called our customer experience library. We didn't call it service patterns. I don't think we were aware of service patterns as a thing, but it was approaching a similar problem space. So when I joined the Ministry of Justice, some colleagues there were looking into reviewing how we were doing design assurance, and they'd already started conversations about service patterns. And I came in and thought, oh, I recognise this, so I'd like to get involved with that. And it was a bit by chance. But since then, over the past 18 months, it's been a lot of reading, researching, reaching out. We're experimenting internally with the Ministry of Justice on creating our own patterns. But a big focus of mine recently has been a cross-department initiative. So colleagues from DEFRA, DWP, Department for Education, and the Home Office have been working together to create a prototype of a cross-government service pattern. I think we'll have a chance to talk a bit more about that later on. But yeah, that's my focus at the moment. Oh, sorry, I didn't ask you to move the slide on, but there we go. So yeah, trying to figure out what our own patterns are, and internally testing our ideas, sharing our progress, and working with others. That's the summary.
I'm just going to stand up because I can't see the slides. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy. I work at Barnardo's as the head of service design. For those of you who don't know, Barnardo's is the biggest children's charity in the UK. And our mission is really to support and work with children, families and young people to help them feel safer, happier, healthier and more hopeful. And the way we do that is partly through policy influencing work with central government and also service delivery. So about half of our income comes through commission services. We're commissioned by local authorities and NHS trusts to deliver services. Our team at the moment is working pretty much exclusively on something that we're calling service models, which is very similar to patterns. And it's something that we've defined as a service model would set out the best practice approach for consistent replication across different locations. And what I mean by that is that those kind of service models would try to define what Barnardo's set of services should be in the future. We deliver a huge range of different services at the moment. It's incredibly varied. The way we work is quite fragmented because the things are sort of commissioned at a local level, designed at a local level. And so what we're trying to do is look across that whole piece and that whole portfolio and figure out of all of the different types of mental health services within the community, for example, what is the best version of that for Barnardo's? How do we package that up so in the future, when we're bidding on new work and delivering new services, we've got a template to draw from? And within this diagram here, there's some sort of coloured blocks, and essentially what I think that is the sort of patterns work that we're all talking about today. So within each model, there would be these kind of consistent, repeatable elements. And as Nikola said, there's sort of like a certain percentage of that service model be made up of those repeatable parts, and then a certain percentage would also be the kind of bespoke elements that would be needed to be designed. I think if you move on to the next slide. And I just alluded there just for a second about sort of, I think, some of the kind of inherent challenges to doing patterns and repeatable work at Barnardo's. So we deliver about 700 services across the UK. And as I said, those portfolios are incredibly diverse. They're very reactive based on what commissioners are looking for that particular service. And that portfolio is constantly changing. So it's really hard to sort of get a set picture of what we're doing and what we want to do in the future. And that sort of, in a way, runs somewhat counter to like patterns and things being repeatable and consistent over time. So I think that's just helpful context, I think, for today in terms of like the environment that we're working in. And Barnardo's wants both patterns and models, but also recognises that this is how we operate as an organisation.
Hi, folks. Let's just get tangled. So I'm Kirsty Sinclair, and I'm part of the design team in Scottish Government, where we're also working on patterns, starting in our sort of digital directorate, but there's work ongoing across various services in Scotland. So one of the things that I love about the fact that we're all starting our work in and around patterns and this sort of topic is that we're sharing so much, and we're able to kind of come together and recognise the things which are similar across them, and then what needs to be a different shape for the different shaped organisations that we're in. So within Scottish Government, we're kind of we're all kind of exploring, we're taking similar starts to our work by sort of exploring what are the services that we have, how do we categorise them, what's the naming conventions for that, how does that fit in with the naming conventions that we've already put in place for things in our style guides and our design systems and things. So doing big exercises to look across sort of the landscape of the services that we have control over. And I just put this I feel like I need to explain Scotland whenever across the border. So looking at the devolved services that we do run, but then sort of looking at the big, large public sector bodies, which is where the majority of the services sort of have control and are run from. So things like police and environment and fishing and things like that all operate as their own organisations. And then looking at how those sort of patterns spread again sort of within our local authorities as well, and how those things sometimes tie together. So a lot of that work is sort of, yes, looking at the top layer, the sort of interaction layer. So what's the interdependency between a pattern, how a person might interact with it, your style guide, your design system, and the sort of visual elements to what patterns tend to look like, and putting together boxes and thumbnails and things like that. But the work at the moment is starting to look at how do we start to spot patterns throughout the stack of our services. So for any given pattern, how far down does it stretch into your infrastructure and data layers? And what patterns need to exist within those spaces as well to make them repeatable, to make them reusable, to continue the same argument that they hold the same efficiencies and build the same trust as well. So the work's starting to look into those places. And on the next one, we're starting, we've picked a pattern. So from what we categorise, we're starting looking at the world of licenses. So how people find out about them, get them, apply for them, are registered, what they do once they've got them, how they share them, how they validate them, all of the things that are possible. So looking at a number of patterns that exist across the sort of life journey of this service, and really I suppose the thing which we're most interested in at the moment is not just how do we sort of build up a pattern library of these individual sort of recipe ingredients, but really starting to look at how do people mix them together? How do they join up? Because they're not separate things. They need to exist in a chain of a journey. So how can we design them in such a way that data can flow through them and people's journeys aren't interrupted when they experience a different part? So really that's the kind of question which I'm most interested in at the moment, is how they stitch together and how we can make it so that they can be rearranged.
Lovely, thank you so much. So we're going to get into the discussion now, and the first section is why patterns are important. So the first question is, can you give an example where service patterns can be most useful? And I'll pass that to Nikola.
Yeah, that's the big question. How we can prove the usefulness. So we have a few ideas. So Martin is working on that. For me, personally, patterns are really the gateway to the wider wonderland that is share and reuse. So where we can start looking at all kinds of shareable things there. And with the holy grail then obviously being, how can we enable our teams to work in a way that they by default build shareable things, and on a much wider scale, so on small components up to microservices and systems and all of that. So I think that's for me where the specific interest is around, that service patterns can help us quite naturally figure out the kind of things that have scope and opportunity around them. So if we find what our top service patterns are, then we can actually start mapping them forward onto, across all of our estate, and then start looking where that is used and where we are coming up to needing them again. And then we can actually prioritize teams that can start building them and so on. So, and it all falls out of that work of what we just seen, okay, here's something where someone applies and so on. And it goes down into a funnel of, we add a bit more to it that is useful. And then, okay, at some point we then hopefully start actually building a product around that we can put in our Lego box.
Thank you. And I don't know if Martin, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just in terms of where they can be useful, coming at it from two angles, I think. And actually, these two angles have been part, I think, of our confusion about what we think they are and how they can be used. So one angle is they are about building blocks. They are stuff you can use to build services. That might be signposting to components. It might be user needs that have been identified and agreed as being common across your users for all types of interactions within your organization. But I think they also serve as a framework for how you think about planning and building your services as well. So we have, for example, at the Ministry of Justice, we have a design system. Rob, who sat here, is leading that team, and that's great for making sure we've got consistency in the digital product layer. But I think a value of service patterns, if we get it right, is taking it earlier into right at the start discovery, pre-discovery, even when you're just planning out what you're going to do for the following year, making it easy to recognize that fundamentally the stuff you do consists of maybe 10 to 20 blocks of user task or needs, and that most services can be built in a configuration of those things. And so that framework makes it easier for you to understand how much effort it's going to take to build a thing, but also to signpost you to where you have already done it and there is stuff to use. And then when you actually start building the thing, more signposting and guidance towards all the different bits you can use to pull that together. And I'm keen to stress, I don't see this as replacing the need for design and research. It's just about saying there's stuff we know, you don't need to figure it out again. Focus on the stuff that makes your service unique and different, and put the research into that.
Thank you, Martin. And Amy?
Thanks. Well, I agree with all of that. I think for Barnardo's the modelling work or the pattern work is really well suited to services that we want to scale and grow. So the bits of the service delivery that we know have shared common elements and also need a degree of tailoring. But I think the process of doing the work has also really helped us start to understand what we do. I imagine it's the same for all of our organisations. The list of services doesn't really exist anywhere. And so by sort of digging around and trying to map and understand what's common, I think just we're trying to sort of help surface what it is we do and get a better understanding across the organisation of our definitions for services and how we want to categorise them and think about them going forward.
Yeah. And we'll move over to the next question, which is, what's the impact of having patterns? Amy, wonder whether you want to kick us off on that one.
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, so our team is positioned within our sort of business development unit. So the models and the patterns are really seen as kind of an intrinsic part of how we grow as a charity and develop more financially sustainable models, more competitive models within the market, more effective ways of delivering services. And so we're not at implementation yet. I would say we're about sort of 6 to 7 months into this process. So we're way away, but we're starting to think about how we measure the impact of patterns. And one of the ways we will be doing this is once the model has been implemented within a locality, within a contract, we'll be working really closely with our children's services teams and our data teams to understand how effective that model is compared to, for example, similar types of services we've delivered in the past. We'll also be looking to measure how efficient it makes our sort of bidding process and our mobilization of services process, basically. So when we're looking at bidding for a new contract, we have a template to draw from rather than designing that service from scratch. And lastly, does it lead to growth? Does it help us become more competitive as a charity? Does it help us win more work and therefore impact the lives of more young people and children? So I'd say those are the main ways.
Kirsty, do you want to follow on from there?
I think that sounds fantastic. I think all the chat around how we measure the improvements made and how this is having an impact and an effect, not just to the services and the running of the services and how much it costs to put them together, but how do we measure how that has an impact on the folk at the other end of the service as well? It's a big thing. I think we're kind of all similar in that we've got this sort of vision of a reusable kit of parts that people can pull from and assemble as needed. And for us, that kit of parts sort of extends to all your pre-existing user research and how that is put into repositories and sort of itemized and able to be found by people, how it links into getting teams ready for going through their service assessments and standards and sort of making sure that they're sort of working into the correct checklists and resourcing themselves and bringing in the right skills at the right time. How do you help them plan for testing that they might need to do when they've sort of pulled in a pre-existing pattern and adjusted it to their sort of methods? So I guess the vision of this sort of beautiful future where people are able to help themselves to the parts that make up services. And it's looking at what else needs to be part of that soup of reusable stuff. How do we package that and how do we design it in such a way that the folk who actually have the responsibility at that stage, and that's, policy experts or people who've been granted a little bit of budget to improve a part of their service, how do we design with them in mind so that they can be sort of taking the right action with these patterns and not being scared of them and not sort of using that age-old phrase of, oh, but my service is different and we're special and I can't use something which is from the box. I'll just go and do it myself, and we're kind of back to square one. So how can we really work with those folk to kind of say and design those moments where they can be a little bit special and they can put all their stuff on the table and the adjustments can be made so that the reusability of all of the parts can be sort of made best use of, is a key part for us.
Thank you. Should we move over to the next question?
Yeah. So we will move on to the next section, which is where are we with implementing service patterns? So I'm going to put to Nikola, how have you organised your teams to explore service patterns?
Thank you. So with my design leadership team, we're tackling that on 3 angles, really. So one is the interaction angle. So thanks, Rob, with our really successful design system team. We're kind of developing a model, as a service model, really. So how would the box look like of the Lego? So design system team is really successful. We have buy-in. We have, we get money for it. The team is growing. So there is really a lot of learning around that. We're just implementing a new contribution model, and also looking at the kind of collaboration model around how we can work closer with our areas there. So this is really a model that can help us in the long run share and reuse all kinds of stuff. And I think this kind of a decentralized model with a strong center really is the way to go there. So if we have the areas, the agencies, the teams building the things in a shareable way, but we still need the center, to own the library, to host the stuff, to make things happen, to do the planning, to develop the strategy, and all of that, and also raise capability of how to do those things. So, and I think this is really quite a scalable model that I'd love to see, across Gov as well. So that's the interaction design part. Then we have the more service designy part that Martin is looking at, where we were talking about, we have some really interesting cross-gov things happening. So I think tomorrow is our next workshop, where we have 30 different departments or something bizarre like that already signed up for. So that's interesting work. And the prison work that is happening is really exciting. And then the third bit is where I'm working really closely with the engineering leadership, so with our head of engineering and his leads, and where we're really looking at how can we get closer. So first of all, what's on the engineering front, on interesting shareable stuff. So we're talking about user research and so on, but there's also lots of stuff in the engineering realm that we should really reuse. But then also look at how can we get closer to actually build common components, and that's something where we really want to get a big step forward in the next half year. So really excited about that.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, what barriers or problems did you overcome to unlock that work?
Money, I think, is so it really is. You have to find that model of get the buy-in from the leadership to prioritize these kind of things, and then find allies. I think that's what I've learned in the last year. So you can't force people to do that. You find people who are also from other professions, and within our professions, people who are actually excited about that and want to do that thing. So and then move it forward and find the usefulness and start proving things. So get in the circle.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So building a case is really important, and surfacing that evidence to make a case for even doing this work. And I think that's a challenge in itself, isn't it? We'll move over to the next question, which is my favourite one, which is, do you see any opportunities for better consistency across sectors? So I know, in order to deliver to user outcomes, we need cross-sector collaboration. So what are your thoughts on that? Martin, I'll come to you on that one.
Thanks. When we were doing our research initially into service patterns, if you Google service patterns, you come across a couple of very familiar blogs at this point, and TPX are there, and Essex County Council that you worked with, and the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, as well. So we started reaching out to some other departments and sharing our findings, and it was really obvious really quickly that although we might have slightly different words, we were all finding fundamentally the same building blocks, especially in government, applying for things, making decisions, requesting information, maybe booking an appointment. And we ran some workshops. We had about 5 or 6 departments involved just to validate this. And it was just dot voting and sorting cards. And we agreed, yeah, actually, we're all pretty much in the same place here. So then we decided to take it a step further. And we ran another couple of workshops where we tried to see what categories of information could exist within a service pattern library that could also be shared across departments. I'm enjoying the fact that a lot of us are using the word stuff today when we talk about what's in a pattern, because it's a bit of a debate what should exist in there. We looked at 15 possible categories of stuff that you could find in a pattern, ranging from research to the steps and stages or the sub-elements of a pattern, to recommended UI components and patterns, to internal business metrics, to perhaps complete tech solutions that could be implemented. So like something like Gov Notify would be a good example of something that you could say as a signpost to that in a pattern. But we decided to focus on a few categories. So it was shared user needs, both the person who might be applying, so it was an apply service pattern, I should say. So the needs of a person applying for something, the needs of a person managing the application, the scenarios that you would have to consider. So what happens if the person submits something and it's rejected? What happens if they don't submit it in time? And we also agreed on, I like to say steps and stages, but we debate whether we should call them steps or stages because we don't want to imply it's always a linear process. It's more like a toolbox. So again, we got a couple of departments together. We just did some sorting and some voting. And again, we found there was a lot that we all agreed on. It didn't matter if you were DWP or Ministry of Justice. Here are 10 user needs that we believe from our research are common across our organizations. And so recently we have just published, we're calling it a prototype. It's a proof of concept for a service pattern that could work across government, covering these categories. It doesn't have recommended UI components and various other things in it. And I think part of the debate we need to have is, do service patterns work at a cross-government level or only within departments, or is it a bit of both? Hopefully a bit of both, I think, but to be explored. By the way, if you haven't seen it already, please look out for it, and there's a feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you. Is this useful? And then just very quickly, in our conversations with other partners, including the private sector, even though we might call it slightly different things, we're still finding a lot of similarities. Jen has been working on a pattern for people in prison requesting stuff. And it's not a million miles away from someone buying a mobile phone. It sounds surprising, but it still involves selecting the thing you want, submitting it, getting confirmation, fulfilling the thing, confirming it's been done. I don't want to push it too far, but there are more similarities than not, I think.
Yeah, and I think that feeds into what Nikola was talking about with her Lego blocks, where, you know, some of these service patterns will be similar and they'll have similar stages and similar components and things like that. But yeah, thank you, Martin. So we shall move on to Amy, and we're going to ask what you talked about service models and service patterns in your intro, but I was just wondering if you can expand on that. What is what are the similarities? Like, where do they overlap?
Yeah, of course. Actually, could you bring up the slide, the sort of second one that I had? Oh, sorry, first one. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. So, as I think I said, the patterns for us exist as repeatable elements within models, multiple models. So, if I maybe give an example. So we're working on a model to design family centres or family hubs at the moment. So that's a collection of 24 plus services that are co-located within a community setting to support anyone who's pregnant, right up to families who have 19, 25-year-olds. So it's really, really broad. But within what seems to be occurring within each one of these centres is there is a role, a family support worker role, which I think is a pattern. So this is someone who works with the family, they hold a caseload, they work with them for a certain period of time, they do some kind of crisis intervention, some signposting, all that sort of general stuff. But basically what we're noticing is that that role is common, not just for family centres, but across a number of different family support services that we offer. So there's a very similar role that we're currently delivering or piloting within emergency departments, and also potentially within primary care settings. And so there are kind of nuances to what that role looks like in those healthcare settings, because the type of families that they're encountering at that point in the system, the health needs, things like that. But there is a sort of common set of competencies and skills that that worker has. And so what we're trying to do is design that pattern at the moment, that role descriptor, so Barnardo's in the future has a more consistent way of understanding what the training requirements for that role are. How do you ensure quality over time for that person and in their role and what they're doing, and then understand where the nuances and where that needs to flex within those different contexts. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea about kind of models versus patterns and that relationship.
Fab, thank you.
We'll move over to the next section, which is what needs to be done next. Service patterns can feel a little bit like theory, but so what are we going to do next? So the next question, Nikola, we'll go back to you for this one, which is what type of leadership or team support or infrastructure do you really need to deliver intentionally with service pattern mindsets?
Yeah, we need to build all that. So we don't have this box of Lego. We don't even have the box yet. So in these big reviews and blueprints and so on that came out in January around how we work in government. So one of the things was that basically we are structurally set up to work in silos, and the strategy is delivery and so on. That enforces that in a way. Everyone is just running in a direction as fast as possible. So we really need to overcome this working in silos and start learning really how to work in more cross-cutting ways. And that's not easy. So really we need some kind of a central architecture, infrastructure, and we can learn from our design systems around that. And someone needs to own this and drive this. I think currently we're kind of hoping and praying that it's somehow organically happening, but that's not going to happen. So this needs to actively be done. And so we need that centralized thing. We also then need the collaboration and contribution model where everyone can really feed into this. And I think this is where we're currently struggling with the Gov design system, for example. So that has a really strong center, but it's really not easy enough to contribute things and so on. So that's where we're blocking that. We need this kind of onion model in a way. Then there is also something around capability. So most of us don't actually know, how to do something so it's shareable and what to do it and where to put that and all of that. So this is something where we really we need to learn. We need new ways of working. We need to figure out, so do we need another step in our agile processes that is around resharing something and so on. So there's a lot we need to look at. And then around culture, so we need buy-in from the deciders. There needs to be a different prioritization model. Like I said, if it's building something shareable by default is quite a shift from strategy is delivery. So we need to put more emphasis and more priority on more reward for teams who actually build something that is reusable and so on. So there's a bit of a culture shift. And then there is also something that we don't have currently, some kind of coordination effort where we really need to look at wider what's actually happening, what's coming up. So we need a mix of our teams working in agile ways, but we still need a bit of an idea of what's coming up, and then coordinating that a lot better. So yeah, we can stop building the same thing over and over again, like Martin said. So really big change, I think, in our ways of working, but the reward and the efficiency that we could get out of that is just mind-blowing if we can move towards that. So you can see there's a blog coming out about this. So.
And there's a huge drive on efficiency, right? And so the way that we orchestrate our organisations to deliver services potentially needs a different way of thinking. And maybe this way of pattern spotting and established patterns could be a way in which we can do things in a slightly different way that could allow for better reuse and better consistency. We'll move over to the next question.
Thanks, Jazz. So the next question is, what can people inside organisations do? And I will put that to Amy first.
Yeah, so I think the journey we've been on has been quite a long one. I joined Barnardo's about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think there's been 4 separate attempts to try and do this work, building blocks, patterns, branded in different ways. And I think the way we started out was to just try to track and map as many of these patterns that we were seeing across our services as we could. But I think where we've got to is probably as a result of a bit of luck and timing, in that we had a new chief exec, we had a new strategy, a restructure, and so the kind of focus for our team was reset quite recently. But simultaneously, we were making the case for why we should be doing modelling and how we can use that to really scale service design at Barnardo's, because it's been really challenging, as you can probably imagine. As I said, each of these services is very individually designed. And our team is very small, so we couldn't be there at the point of design for every single one of these. So this was a way for us to kind of see how can we get ahead of some of that and try and design a template and design a model up front. So kind of mapping as much of what we could see in terms of those common elements from our perspective. Making the case what was important to our senior leadership at the time, and understanding, what would convince them, and trying to prototype it as much as we could, given the time and the budget restraints we had, without kind of working on it full time at that point. And I think your point about allies is really important as well, because there are other bits of the charity that are trying to do this. They wouldn't call it patterns, but for example, there's a lot of work to try and develop a common set of outcomes for how we measure all of our services, because at the moment that's done at a very local service by service level, and we can't see at an aggregate level how much impact we're making on the lives of children and young people very clearly. So that, for me, feels like another pattern. So how do we consistently measure the impact of what we do? And working really closely with that team to kind of, build those relationships and kind of drive that ambition, really.
I wonder if it's more of the same, actually, but just in different scales of kind of things in government take a while to get started, and there are always whispers about what might be the next project, or who might get the budget, or who's going to be running on which projects. So I think it's the age-old one of make friends with policy and share little bits and show lots of stuff, keep turning up and showing it. And I think one of my questions back to all of us is, how do we find the sort of visual language for talking about this stuff that isn't necessarily flat boxes on screens? Because I think people get a bit bored of that after a while. And it's to do with our collective language and the taxonomy and the hierarchy of it all. But sort of how are we displaying this and showing it and giving it as an option, and kind of working in that pre-discovery phase of, you're about to do something, have you considered, here's some stuff, and sort of being ready to host those conversations and welcome people in, Yes.
Thank you for that. This is our last question, and this last question is going to be for everyone. So we'll go round. So what needs to happen? What's the one thing that you'd like to see happen?
Some kind of a cross-gov pilot, I think, would be amazing, of building something together. I'd love that.
Oh, yeah, I'd love that too. Martin, do you want to go next?
someone needs to get this over the line and prove the benefit, because we've been talking about this for like 10 years, and I don't know why there's such a resurgence in it in the last 2 years now, but it's happening and people are putting time and money into it. So I think this time is different. But the timescales involved in designing a pattern and then seeing at least 2 services built and deployed using that pattern, and then measuring whether or not that gave you a more consistent experience and a more efficient way of building, that is hard. And I think we all believe it, but that getting over the line and proving the benefit thing is really what I want to see next.
Yeah, building some momentum to do that, I think, is fundamental. Yeah. Aim.
Yeah, I think for us, it's probably, again, we're sort of fairly early on, but there's a risk, I think, that when we design these models and design these patterns, there's a sort of like, well, that's done, let's move on, let's do the next one. And what I'm trying to do at the moment is try and help us figure out internally what are the ongoing capacity and resources needed to continually develop the patterns, continually develop the models, and ensure we're learning from them when they're implemented, in all over the country. How do we learn from that and continue to, develop that model for all others to use in the future?
We have to choose one thing. This is hard. I've got 2 things. But I think the one thing which I'd really love to see is sort of working out our working of how do we collaborate alongside the teams who are making use of the patterns and bringing them in, and actually how do we develop a system for them to go through so that we're not picking things off the shelf and slotting them into services that are a wee bit broken and replacing broken bits. How can we still design in some of the good stuff which we do, the good working, so that we're helping to better services as we go, so that these patterns aren't sort of replications of what's existed before, but actually sort of how do we build it into a process whereby we are unpicking and making better the insides of the services at the same time.
Thank you to all panel members for answering that last question for me. We'll move over to the discussion. Jen, did you?
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Lovely, so interesting to look about this topic. Thank you so much for your answers already. We're super lucky. We work under Jeanette Clement, for 2 amazing service designs with us who've really been implementing a lot of service pattern work. And I think there's a lot of conversation that works also on the private side as well as public side. The main question I've got is more about what service pattern looks like at an organizational level. So let's pretend for a second that all our services are identified and understood within our companies. Let's then pretend that all of them are built with service patterns, consistently. How would you design your organization to be able to make the best services possible using service patterns and using service identifiers? That's for anything.
We really need to get out of the silos then. So we really need to start building centralized infrastructure as a priority, and have these kind of cross-cutting, infrastructure teams. I think that's we're still, building the org structure, delivering the org structure with everything we do. And I think that's the move from, I think probably also in e-commerce or so on. I don't know, you probably also have teams that all look at a part of the bigger story, and in a way that makes it then much easier to measure and all of that, because it's bits. But I think that's what we haven't cracked, how we can change our structures to look at the bigger picture and then deliver bits from there, instead of starting with a bit and then try desperately to link it all up somehow.
Does anybody else want to feed off that question?
Does that then mean that organizations such as EE, for example, could have a pattern owner for apply or check or refund or whatever the list of patterns are, and that person holds the expertise, has a team around them, they get deployed where they're needed? Is that a possible thing to trial?
Talk to these guys.
Yeah, okay.
That's definitely something we're looking at. I think it's more just
it's the same model, just sideways, not down the way.
I think when you're organizing the organization, I think that's when it gets complicated. So when you're how do we actually set up these verticals to be appropriate for the service pattern, so therefore we can design and actually have all the people talking together in situ. If you look at Uber, if you look at Just Eat or any of those models, they've set up their organization to be pattern focused. So everyone thinks along those verticals across the different stages and services. I think that's a very hard question in large organizations, especially like public services. You have many services. You're trying to pull them together to understand how to effectively build them, how to spin up a new area. That's what I think is.
That's going to be really difficult as well with the tech stack as well, because the way that we procure technology, the way that we implement data. So actually that is, I mean, that's the experimentation phase that we probably need to explore as well. But like also just to point out, patterns isn't always the answer. Sometimes there might be, so I think like when we were talking about patterns, there might be high priority pattern areas that you want to like look at, because we know that there's high impact and value in these spaces, but that's not to say that everything should be a pattern. There probably needs to be that horizontal line as well as those verticals, because if you pattern everything, is that really going to create efficiency when, you know, you probably want to explore usage and volume of people that need to be using that pattern, and actually you wouldn't want to you would probably want to keep it open and flexible so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, to just make sure that everyone's using the same tech. So you do need it to be flexible as well. So, but yeah, that's that. We're at that very early stage, right, where we're trying. Yeah.
Just, I used to work at BT, by the way, so I've gone from like one very large private sector organisation to a very large public sector organisation. I think just from that perspective, in particular, it's a particular challenge. I know people have experimented with the idea of a journey owner, for example, but you have so many channels and so many variations. That person just ends up I think inevitably ends up several layers removed from the actual thing that the user interacts with. So I don't have an answer. I just think I recognize for very large organizations, there is a particular challenge there. And you've got to be realistic. You can only have such a size of a group of people who can know each other and talk to each other before it becomes unmanageable. And I know like Uber's not a small organization, but I think they have a much tighter product set and channel set than BT, Ministry of Justice, and other large legacy orgs have.
I was just going to say another way. I mean, like community, I am going to advocate for community power. But I do think like if we can define good practices for a pattern, whilst we recognise it might be different, but at least we're striving towards common North Stars. And that might be like a way to improve consistency in the way that we implement.
I was just going to say, when you mentioned the tech stack, that Nikola, you mentioned that you had been having conversations with the head of engineering, and I just wondered how engaged they are in this work, and you know how invested they are in it.
Very interested. It's obviously super controversial because we have such a diverse tech stack, and we have to find a way to standardize that a bit more. So I think everyone sees the opportunity level in that is just absolutely massive. And we just need some kind of a view of what is the next future. Basically, we're doing a lot of getting off legacy tech panicky because our legacy tech is a real problem. But we need some kind of a future vision where we want to, get to and align there instead of just getting off one thing and into the next legacy situation. So yeah, it's an opportunity, but it's controversial as well.
Definitely. Is there any more questions?
Hi. On what you were saying, I remember as well, Martin, I think you were talking you don't go up to the level, if you're talking from a blueprint perspective, you don't go up to the level of UI and UX in terms of service patterns. But how deep do you go in terms of what is included within the pattern? Are you going to talk about which type of technology are you going to using? And then do we enter the talk of, is it a capability that we're just building? And therefore, because again, as you were saying, the back end is the front end, are we just building products? And therefore, we're recycling service design in a way as well to increase efficiency of delivery, to increase efficiency. And so this is like few things that I might, it's 2 or 3 questions in one, sorry.
I'd love to go like full stack service patterns, like front to end, everything that's useful, really, from user research, some kind of service starter kits, things like that, up to but I'd love to build a shared case management system that we can use. So anything, and I think we probably just have to start collecting all of these useful things, and then we naturally will see, we can get data actually about what is used the most and so on, and can start building it up from there. And another team is doing something in that space, and they're building another thing that we can add to that. So I think it's not we can't start with the whole thing. We just need to put the box in place, basically, and then let people add things there and see what works best.
Does anybody want to follow on from that?
So I split my time between two project teams that are sort of next to each other and doing some of this work in semi-intentionally, in that we've got this sort of design team looking at service patterns, and we've got slightly more of a tech-focused team looking at common components, which is a term that means a different thing to every person that hears it, but by which we mean sort of discrete pieces of technology that can be sort of added in for a particular task in during a service. So we're working on one at the moment, which is all about delivering secure mail. And one which is all about digital licenses. So things that exist at a moment in a service but aren't the service in its entirety. So we're kind of interdependently designing for these common components and the technology behind them, and how do they slot into a service? What are all the other considerations that you need to take into account to insert something new, and all the tech requirements for that? But also, how can we use it as an opportunity to make the pattern broader and wider and more sort of test it as we go? So we're looking at license. We've got this product that can make a license digital or give you a digital license. We're doing it alongside the Food Standard Scotland team. So all the places that you might need to show that you're qualified to sell sausage rolls or have an ice cream van. But we know that next in line for that tech component is Police Scotland, because they want to do firearms license. We've got the fishing vessels coming up next. We've got tanning beds, a wide array of different licenses that the pattern is going to have to cover. So how do you sort of hold that in contention at once, design specifically for the team that you're working, the project team that you're working with at the moment, make sure the tech is working for them, but can also go a wee bit broader in time. So, stress testing patterns and tech as we go.
So just on what's in them, I think that is partly informed by, I think I'm seeing two broad different ways of approaching service patterns. There are organizations that are starting with design systems that have components and patterns. They're saying, what happens if we have slightly bigger patterns, and what stuff would be in there? And that might get you to like pages of flows for digital screens and the like. And then there's another approach, which is more abstract framework thinking. What's the stuff that people need to do as part of a service? And then what's the information I could collate about that stage of the service that would be useful to people? And they probably do meet in the middle, and I think there is a lot of overlap, but I think how you're coming at it is informing. Is it more about signposting to digital product components, or is it more about signposting to these are the user needs and steps and maybe other channel considerations that you need to come at? But I think this then also links to we need to get consistent on our words and what we mean by even just service patterns itself. Nikola and I, every couple of weeks, have a conversation where it's like, are we still agreed on this? Is it even called service patterns? So I think it's still TBC. There's a bucket of stuff that could be in a pattern, and there are different organizations experimenting with different focuses on different parts of that bucket.
And just to add, the criteria that goes inside a pattern can vary. So, for example, if you're looking at a register pattern, for example, some of the data considerations and the safety and the way that you're storing the data and the type of thinking that you'd apply into register versus request will be slightly different. So sometimes what goes in the pattern can vary depending on what it is. Any more questions? I think we can take one more.
Thank you for that. That's good. My questions to the whole panel, and it's regarding getting buy-in. And you mentioned policymakers getting close to them. I'm thinking in terms of my organisation and senior civil servants, director levels. How much do we need to get them closer and thinking about service patterns to then maybe build up more momentum?
Yeah, really important. I think our right up to the chief exec is well, I would say the chief exec is aware of the work happening, like chief operating officer sort of level is invested in it. So, and I think it's very timely for us because, as I said, we've gone through a restructure. So they're looking at kind of how we operate going forward. And this is providing, I think, some clarity and some direction for like how things could look in the future, but it's very untested. So I think as I said, we're still sort of fairly early on in the journey, but talking about how to measure impact and being able to show results, even if they're incredibly like small at this stage, is the key, I think, for us.
I did a presentation to the leads, all the sort of leadership level within the digital directorate. So like I got 1/12 of Scottish Government. And I was already with my arguments about how patterns are like cost saving and increase efficiency and could build trust and consistency and mental load and all that. And they all just nodded. They're like, yeah, cool. We agree. Like reuse is great. We're signed in. Show us what happens next. I was like, I'm not ready with that stuff yet. I haven't done it yet. But we're lucky in a way that we've started small. We're like a 4-person design team working on this, and we've got permission for about 6 months to work on it, have a trial area to start in, work out what we even might be measuring before we're promising that we're measuring it. So I guess your question has made me think about how do we scale that up? How do we show that it's working in one place and use that as a wee exemplar and use it to get the next level of buy-in, use it to take to other bits of government or other departments and scale up and work out what we've all been talking about sort of like the working practices and how do you make it a bigger team elsewhere, borrow from what's been done in other places, I guess.
I think it has been a few years actually of strategic influencing for us where you go from what's even the point of a design system. I've never seen, that done as well enough that it's like useful and so on, to a level of, okay, this is a no-brainer. We see the point that this that there is really efficiency in there, and so it's a lot of talking to everyone and until the voices multiply and the ideas of that is in people's heads, and we're at this point now where we're looking for kind of pilot teams where we see they are at an interesting point in their journey of building a service where we feel like they could start looking at building something that is shareable and getting the design system so successful and so on. So it's really a constant influencing on a strategic level, and always make sure we have our directors on board and all of that. And like I said before, it is a move of how we used to do our work. So it is a bit scary for people because you feel like actually that might take a bit more time now to build stuff if we have to implement these kind of different ways of working. So we're still at that point where we're looking at leadership, people with budgets who are specifically interested in that and see the success stories that can come out of that, and then try to do something in pilots with them and so on. So it's a constant, and it's always the risk that you get someone new in who really doesn't see the point in it. So you can never give up. You always have to reinforce that, and until then you get to the point where you actually have the data and you can actually prove this is this is making it easier and faster and better and all of that. So we're always on the journey.
Yeah, and the workshops that we're running, we're inviting policy folks to join those workshops. And what we're finding is they're actually very engaged and they're really interested, which I think is like the first step, because if you want to build a case for doing more of this work, we need allies and we need to actually take people on the journey with us. I don't think this is just a design thing. I think this is a cross-collaboration thing. And if we really think that this is a different way of creating efficiency and building services that are more consistent, I think we need to bring policy folks with us and actually involve them. And then when we do, we're actually getting some good feedback. And the feedback that we're hearing from our policy colleagues is that they think it's a really good mindset and it's a way to collaborate, which sometimes, we do work in silos. And so actually the first step might be to break down those silos and actually come together and create some alignment and agreement on how we're going to be delivering. So I just want to reassure you that policy folks are actually interested in this, and I'm seeing that. So really good question.
Fab, thank you. So I think that's us at time now. Can you move on to the last thank you slide? So thanks to everybody for coming. One thing that I didn't say at the beginning is that unfortunately Jeanette Clement was unable to join us today. So, we want to thank her for the effort that she put in preparing for today, send her our best wishes. Thank you to Kirsty for standing in at the very last minute. Thank you to all of our panel, and thank you to the team at TPXimpact as well for everything that they've done to put this event on. And I'm sure you, as well as myself, you're all looking forward to seeing the Services Week sessions 2026 and see how far we've come. Thank you.
Just to add an extra event. So we've got an event on tomorrow. There's a QR code. Our lovely Vicky is hosting. So if you've not, this is another session that TPX are hosting as part of Services Week. So if you're around, you're more than welcome to join us. Thank you, everyone.